The sun was a brutal fist in the Montana sky, pounding down on Ben Callahan's auto shop, a ramshackle garage on the edge of Billings. Grease-stained and grinning, Ben was elbow-deep in the guts of a '67 Chevy Impala, his fingers dancing over rusted bolts like a surgeon with a scalpel. The radio blared Lynyrd Skynyrd, and the smell of motor oil hung thick in the air. This was his kingdom wrenches, spark plugs, and the satisfying clank of metal on metal. At 32, Ben was the best mechanic in Yellowstone County, a man who could coax life back into any engine, no matter how dead it seemed. His sandy hair was perpetually mussed, his blue eyes sharp with a spark of mischief, and his drawl carried the easy charm of a guy who could talk his way out of a bar fight or into a free beer. "Hold tight, darlin'," he muttered to the Impala, tightening a bolt. "We'll get you purring like a kitten." But the air shifted a strange, electric hum that made the hairs on his neck stand up. The radio crackled. Skynyrd's "Sweet Home Alabama," warping into a low, guttural drone. Ben frowned, wiping sweat from his brow, and glanced around. The garage was empty, but the shadows seemed wrong. Sharp, too alive. What in the Sam Hill? The floor lurched beneath him, and the world spun like a tire blown at 80 miles an hour. Light exploded, blinding and hot, swallowing the garage, the Impala, everything. Ben's stomach churned as he not fell, but hurtled through a void that smelled of ozone and something ancient, like dust and blood. He tried to yell, but the sound was ripped away. When the world slammed back into focus, Ben was sprawled face down in dirt. Not the oily concrete of his shop, but coarse, gritty earth that tasted of steppe-grass and horse sweat. He coughed, spitting out a clump of soil, and pushed himself up. His denim jacket was singed, his boots scuffed, but he was in one piece, barely. Where the hell? His voice trailed off as he took in the scene. He was in a vast plain, the horizon stretching endless, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The air was sharp, cold, alive with the tang of smoke and leather. And there, not 50 yards away, was a camptance of felt and hide, fires spitting sparks, and men in fur-lined armor barking orders in a language Ben couldn't place. Horses stamped, their breath steaming in the chill, and wooden carts with massive wheels creaked under the weight of weapons and supplies. This wasn't Montana. This wasn't even the 21st century. "Ah, hell no," Ben muttered, scrambling to his feet. His heart jackhammered as he patted his pocket knife, a half-eaten Snickers bar. No phone, no keys. No way to make sense of this. A shadow fell over him, and he froze. A rider loomed, astride a stocky horse that snorted like it was sizing him up for a fight. The man was broad, his face weathered as old leather, with a braided beard and eyes like flint. His armor clinked with bone and iron, and the curved sword at his hip gleamed wickedly. He barked something in that guttural tongue, pointing a gloved hand at Ben. Whoa, easy, partner." Ben raised his hands, flashing his best disarming grin. "I'm just, lost. Took a wrong turn at Albuquerque?" The rider's scowl deepened, and he shouted again, louder. 2 more men appeared, dragging Ben to his feet with hands like iron traps. They smelled of sweat and horse, and their grip promised pain if he tried anything stupid. Ben's mind raced. Time travel? A prank? A fever dream from too many late-night tacos? Whatever this was, he needed to play it smart. They hauled him through the camp, past fires where men roasted meat on spits, past women stitching hides, past kids wrestling in the dirt. Eyes followed him, curious, suspicious, hostile. The tents grew larger, more ornate, until they stopped at one that dwarfed the rest, its entrance flanked by spears topped with horsehair banners. Inside, the air was thick with incense and the weight of power. Ben was shoved to his knees on a rug that looked like it cost more than his entire shop. Before him sat a man who could only be the boss. He was compact, coiled like a spring, with a face carved from stone and eyes that seemed to see through Ben's soul. His armor was simple but pristine, and the men around him stood rigid, like they'd rather die than blink without his say-so. This, Ben realized with a jolt, was no ordinary warlord. This was the warlord, the one he'd read about in high school history, the one who'd carved an empire with blood and fire. Genghis freaking Khan. The Khan spoke, his voice low and commanding, and a wiry man with a wispy beard translated, his English oddly accented but clear. The great Khan demands to know who you are and why you trespass on his lands. Ben swallowed, his throat dry as a desert. Name's Ben Callahan, sir. I'm a mechanic from Montana. America. I fix things, cars, trucks, you name it. I don't know how I got here, I swear. One minute I'm in my shop, the next I'm eating dirt in wherever this is. The translator relayed his words, and the Khan's eyes narrowed. He leaned forward, studying Ben like a hawk eyeing a mouse. Then he gestured at a massive wooden cart nearby, its wheel cracked and splintered, its axle bent. The translator spoke again. The Khan's war chariots break too often. They slow his conquests. Can you fix this? Ben's pulse quickened. A way out? Maybe. He crawled to the cart, ignoring the guard's glares, and ran his hands over the wood, crude, heavy, but not so different from a wagon. The wheel was a mess, split spokes, no balance, and an axle that screamed for grease. His fingers itched for his toolbox, but he'd have to make do. Piece of cake, he said, forcing confidence into his voice. Give me a few hours, some tools, and I'll have this thing rolling smoother than a Cadillac on the interstate. The Khan's expression didn't change, but he nodded. The translator barked orders, and soon Ben was surrounded by skeptical smiths and carpenters, their tools primitive but functional. He got to work, his hands moving on instinct, shaving wood, hammering pegs, and improvising a crude bearing with animal fat and leather strips. The Mongols watched, muttering, some laughing at his strange methods, others intrigued as the wheel took shape. As the sun dipped low, painting the steppe gold, Ben stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. The cart stood proud, its wheels spinning true, its axle purring like a well-tuned engine. He grinned, dusting off his hands. Told ya, Ben Callahan don't mess around. The crowd fell silent as the Khan approached, inspecting the cart with a critical eye. He climbed aboard, signaled a driver, and the cart rolled fast, smooth, effortless. A murmur rippled through the camp, half awe, half disbelief. The Khan turned to Ben, and for the first time, a ghost of a smile tugged at his lips. You have skill, the translator said. The Khan grants you life. For now, you will stay. You will fix more. Ben's relief was short-lived. The Khan's gaze hardened, and he added, but if you fail, or if you betray us, your head will adorn my spear. Ben forced a laugh, his stomach twisting. No pressure, huh? As night fell, The camp buzzed with enervires roaring, drums pounding, warriors sharpening blades. Ben sat by a fire, gnawing on tough mutton, his mind spinning. He was in 1200 AD, in the heart of the Mongol Empire, surrounded by the most ruthless army in history. His skills had bought him time, but he was a fish out of water, a gearhead in a world of swords and sorcery, and yet a spark of excitement flickered in his chest. This was a challenge, a puzzle, a chance to do what he did best: fix things, make them better, leave his mark. But as he stared into the flames, a figure caught his eye, a woman, cloaked in shadow, her eyes glinting like a cat's. She moved with a grace that didn't belong in this rough camp, and when she met his gaze, her lips curved in a knowing smile. She vanished into the dark, leaving Ben with a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Whoever you are," he muttered, "you're trouble." The drums grew louder, the stars burned bright, and Ben Callahan, the mechanic from Montana, knew one thing for sure: his life had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. The Mongol camp pulsed with life under a dawn sky, streaked with crimson, like a wound across the heavens. Ben Callahan, still reeling from his time travel plunge from Billings, Montana, to the heart of Genghis Khan's empire, stood amid a chaos of wood, iron, and sweat. His denim jacket was smeared with grease and step dust, but his blue eyes burned with a gearhead's focus. Yesterday, he'd fixed a war chariot under the Khan's steely gaze, earning a stay of execution. Today, the real work began, turning a fleet of creaking, bone-rattling carts into machines fit for conquest. And if he failed, well, the Khan's spear was looking mighty cozy with the idea of his head as a trophy. Ben's new shop was a patch of trampled grass beside the camp's forge, where smoke curled like a dragon's breath and hammers rang against anvils. A dozen war chariots loomed around him, their wheels warped, their axles screaming for mercy. They were crude beasts' wooden frames lashed with hide, built for brute force, not finesse. To Ben, they were a challenge, a puzzle, a chance to flex his Montana-bred ingenuity. But the Mongols watching him weren't so sure. Warriors in fur-lined armor leaned on their spears, muttering in their guttural tongue, their eyes flicking between curiosity and contempt. To them, Ben was an outsider, a strange man in stranger clothes, claiming he could work miracles. "All right, fellas," Ben said, clapping his hands and flashing a grin that had charmed many a barmaid back in Billings. "Let's turn these jalopies into Ferraris. Who's with me?" The translator, a wiry man named Timur with a beard like a bird's nest, relayed Ben's words. The Mongols blinked, uncomprehending. "Ferrari?" Timur asked, his accent thick. "What is this?" Ben chuckled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Never mind. Just tell him we're gonna make these carts faster, stronger, and smoother than a cold beer on a hot day." Tamer hesitated, then spoke. The warriors exchanged glances, some smirking, others shaking their heads. One stepped forward, a hulking smith named Batu, his arms like tree trunks, his face scarred from battles Ben could only imagine. He pointed at a chariot, then at Ben, and growled something that needed no translation. "Prove it, or else." Ben nodded, unfazed. "Challenge accepted, big guy." He knelt by the nearest chariot, running his hands over its splintered wheel. His mind raced, pulling from years of fixing trucks, tractors, and even that one time he'd rebuilt a combine harvester for old man Jenkins. These chariots needed balance, durability, and speed qualities the Mongols' crude designs lacked. The wheels were too heavy, the axles too rigid, and the whole setup shook like a jalopy on a dirt road. But Ben saw potential. With a few tweaks, lighter spokes, greased bearings, maybe a reinforced frame, he could make these beasts sing. He turned to Batu, gesturing at the forge. "I need iron, wood, leather, and some of that animal fat you folks use for everything. Oh, and a couple of strong backs. We're building a prototype." Temur translated, and Batu grunted, clearly skeptical but intrigued. Soon, a team of smiths and carpenters gathered, their tools primitive but sharp. Ben took charge, his voice steady, his hands moving with the confidence of a man who'd never met an engine he couldn't tame. He showed them how to carve thinner, stronger spokes, how to wrap iron bands around wheels for durability, how to lubricate axles with fat to reduce friction. The Mongols watched, some scoffing, others leaning closer, fascinated by this foreigner who spoke of bearings and traction like a shaman chanting spells. As the sun climbed, the camp buzzed with Ben's energy. He cracked jokes to lighten the mood, calling the horses four-legged hot rods and the chariots the Khan's muscle cars. The younger Mongols laughed, even if they didn't understand, and Ben's charisma began to chip away at their distrust. One boy, a wiry kid named Khazar, became his shadow, fetching tools and mimicking Ben's swagger. "You, boss," Khazar said, grinning, his English halting but eager. Ben ruffled his hair, feeling a pang of homesickness for the kids who'd hung around his shop back home. But not everyone was charmed. A shadow loomed over the forge. General Subutai, the Khan's right-hand man, a warrior whose name alone made men tremble. Subutai was lean, sharp-eyed, with a presence that sucked the air from the camp. His armor gleamed with polished bone, and his voice was a low growl that promised death to anyone who crossed him. He'd been watching Ben since his arrival, and now he stepped forward, his gaze pinning Ben like a bug on a board. "Outsider," Subutai said, through Temur, his words dripping with suspicion. "You speak strange words. You work strange ways. Where do you come from, truly? Are you a spy for the Jinn, the Khwarezmians?" Ben's stomach tightened, but he kept his grin in place. "Spy? Nah, General. I'm just a grease monkey from Montana. I fix things. Ain't got no beef with nobody, except maybe a busted carburetor or two." Subutai's eyes narrowed, unconvinced. He gestured at Ben's closed jeans, boots, a jacket that screamed not from here. "Your garb is not of this world. Your tools, your speech all foreign. The Khan trusts you for now, but I do not. If you are a deceiver, I will carve the truth from your bones." Ben swallowed, his bravado flickering. "Noted, sir, but I'm here to help. Let me prove it with these chariots, you'll see." Subutai said nothing, his silence more threatening than words. He turned and strode away, leaving Ben with a chill that lingered even in the forge's heat. The other Mongols whispered, their glances sharper now, and Ben realized the tightrope he was walking had just gotten thinner. To shake off the tension, Ben threw himself into the prototype. By midday, it was ready, a sleek chariot with balanced wheels, a reinforced frame, and axles that glided like silk. He called for a test run, and Khazar eagerly volunteered, climbing aboard with a whoop. 2 horses were hitched, and the chariot rolled out to a makeshift track on the steppe, the camp gathering to watch. Ben held his breath as Kassar cracked the reins, and the chariot surged forward fast, smooth, cutting through the grass like a blade. The crowd gasped, then cheered, warriors slapping their thighs in approval. Even Batu nodded, a grudging respect in his eyes. Ben punched the air, grinning. "That's what I'm talking about? Montana engineering, baby?" But the celebration was cut short. A horn blared, and riders galloped into camp, their faces grim. Temur rushed to Ben, his voice urgent. "The Khan summons you, now." Ben's heart sank as he was escorted to the great tent. Inside, Genghis Khan sat like a storm about to break, his generals flanking him, Subutai's glare boring into Ben. The air was thick with tension, and Ben's gut told him this wasn't about his chariot's sweet moves. The Khan spoke, his voice a low rumble, and Temur translated. "A scout reports enemy forces massing to the west. The Khwarezmians seek to ambush us. Our chariots must be ready for battle in 7 days. You, Ben Callahan, will improve them all, make them as swift and strong as the one you built today." Ben nodded, his mind racing. "I can do that, sir. Just need more hands, more materials." The Khan cut him off, raising a hand. "There is more. Subutai believes you are a spy. He demands proof of your loyalty." Ben's mouth went dry. "Proof? I fixed your cart, didn't I? I'm busting my hump out there." Subutai stepped forward, his voice cold. "Words are wind. You will face a trial. Tomorrow, you will ride with our scouts to the enemy's border. If you return with their plans, you live. If you fail or betray us, your life is forfeit." The tent seemed to close in around Ben. A trial? Riding into enemy territory? He was a mechanic, not a damn cowboy. But the Khan's eyes left no room for argument. "So be it," the Khan said, dismissing him. That night, Ben sat by a fire, his mind a tangle of fear and defiance. He wasn't built for espionage, but he'd be damned if he let Subutai win. As he sharpened a borrowed dagger, that mysterious woman appeared again, slipping from the shadows like a whisper. Her cloak was midnight blue, her hair a cascade of black that caught the firelight, and her eyes held secrets older than the steppe. She knelt beside him, her voice soft, laced with an accent he couldn't place. "You're in deep, Ben Callahan," she said, her lips curving in a smile that was both teasing and dangerous. "Subutai smells blood, but I see something in you, a spark the Khan needs." Ben leaned closer, drawn to her despite himself. "And who the hell are you, lady? You keep popping up like a bad penny." She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. "Call me Sarai. I'm a friend, for now. Survive tomorrow, and I might tell you more." Before he could press her, she was gone, leaving only the scent of jasmine and a racing pulse. Ben shook his head, muttering, "Trouble, every damn time." The next morning, Ben mounted a horse his first time since a disastrous 4-H camp in 8th grade and rode out with a scouting party. The steppe stretched endless, the air sharp with danger. His companions, stone-faced warriors, spoke little, their eyes scanning the horizon. Ben's borrowed armor chafed, and the bow they'd given him felt alien in his hands. But he gritted his teeth, channeling every action movie he'd ever seen. "John Wayne, don't fail me now." Hours later, they spotted the enemy Khwarezmian patrol, their banners fluttering like vipers. The scouts signaled for stealth, but Ben's horse, sensing his nerves, snorted loudly, drawing eyes. Panic surged as arrows flew. and the Mongols charged, blades flashing. Ben ducked, his heart pounding, and somehow, through sheer dumb luck, knocked an arrow and fired, hitting a Khwarezmian's shield. The enemy scattered, and the scouts seized a satchel of maps and orders, their mission complete. Back at camp, Ben was a wreck, his hands shaking as he handed the satchel to Subutai. The general's eyes widened, then narrowed as he studied the documents. "You did not betray us," he said grudgingly. "Perhaps you are no spy. Yet." The Khan, watching from his throne, nodded. "You have passed this test, Ben Callahan. Now, make my chariots ready. Time grows short." Ben collapsed by the fire that night, exhausted but alive, the camp's cheers ringing in his ears. Kassar brought him a bowl of fermented mare's milk, and even Batu clapped his shoulder. Sarai's words echoed in his mind, her jasmine scent lingering like a promise. He'd survived Subutai's trial, but the real challenge loomed: hundreds of chariots, a ticking clock, and a war that could swallow him whole. And somewhere, in the shadows, Sarai was watching, her secrets a lure he couldn't resist. The steppe wind howled, carrying the promise of battle, and Ben Callahan, the mechanic from Montana, steeled himself for the fight of his life. The steppe was a furnace under a merciless noon sun, the air shimmering with heat and the acrid tang of molten iron. Ben Callahan, the grease-stained mechanic from Billings, Montana, stood at the heart of Genghis Khan's war camp, his hands raw, his denim jacket tattered, and his blue eyes blazing with a mix of defiance and desperation. 4 days, that's what the Khan had given him, to repair or rebuild 100 war chariots, turning a fleet of rickety, battle-scarred carts into a juggernaut capable of crushing the Khwarezmian enemy. 4 days, or his head would roll, quite literally, at the end of a Mongol spear. The weight of it pressed on Ben like a hydraulic jack, but he wasn't the type to buckle, not yet. The camp thrummed with urgency warriors sharpening curved swords, horses snorting as they were saddled, and scouts galloping in with reports of enemy movements. Ben's shop had grown into a sprawling workshop, a chaotic symphony of hammers, saws, and shouted orders. Dozens of Mongol smiths, carpenters, and laborers swarmed around him, their faces a mix of grudging respect and skepticism. Ben had won them over, somewhat, with his prototype Chariot, a sleek, fast beast that had left the camp cheering. But 100 chariots? In 4 days? Even Henry Ford, on his best day, couldn't pull that off without a factory and a case of Red Bull. "All right, team," Ben hollered, wiping sweat from his brow and flashing a grin that masked his nerves. "We're running a pit crew here, NASCAR style. Khazar, you're on wheels. Batu, axles. Timur, keep the supplies coming. Let's make these babies sing." Khazar, the wiry kid who'd become Ben's biggest fan, saluted with a grin, his eyes bright with hero worship. Batu, the hulking smith, grunted but nodded, his massive hands already shaping iron. Tamer, the translator, scurried off to relay orders, his beard flapping like a flag in the wind. The Mongols moved with purpose, inspired by Ben's relentless energy, but the task was Herculean. Each chariot needed balanced wheels, reinforced frames, and greased axles work that took hours per cart, even with Ben's streamlined methods. And time was a thief, slipping away with every tick of the sun across the sky. Ben had a plan, though. Back in Montana, he'd once rebuilt a fleet of snowplows for the county in record time by setting up an assembly line. The Mongols didn't have conveyor belts, but they had manpower and discipline. He organized the workers into teams. One group carved spokes, another forged iron bands, a third assembled frames. He taught them to standardize part same-sized wheels, same-length axle stows speed things up. It was crude, chaotic, but it worked. By the end of day 1, 10 chariots stood ready, their wheels spinning smooth as a Shelby Mustang's. The camp buzzed with cautious optimism, warriors testing the carts and nodding in approval. But trouble was never far in the Khan's empire, and it came slinking in on day 2, cloaked in shadow and malice. Ben was inspecting a chariot when he noticed a wheel wobbling odd, since he'd checked it himself. He knelt, running his fingers over the axle, and found it, a deliberate cut, deep enough to snap under pressure. Sabotage. His blood ran cold. Someone wanted him to fail, and in a camp where failure meant death, that someone was playing for keeps. "Who did this?" Ben growled, standing and scanning the crowd. The workers froze, their eyes darting nervously. Batu stepped forward, his scarred face darkening, but before he could speak, a voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Perhaps the outsider sabotages his own work," said General Subutai, striding into the workshop with the grace of a panther stalking prey. His armor gleamed, his eyes glinted with suspicion, and his presence silenced the camp. "To weaken us, to betray the Khan." Ben's jaw tightened, his fists clenching. "That's bull, General, and you know it. I'm busting my ass to save your war machines. Someone else is playing dirty." Subutai's lip curled, and he leaned closer, his voice a low hiss. "Prove it, or I will prove your treachery with your blood." The accusation hung in the air, heavy as smoke. The workers whispered, doubt creeping into their eyes. Ben's heart pounded. He was one mistake away from losing everything. But he wasn't about to let Subutai's mind games derail him. "Fine," he said, loud enough for all to hear. "I'll find the bastard who did this, and I'll have your chariots ready, General. Bet on it." Subutai's gaze lingered, cold and unyielding. Then he turned and stalked away. Ben exhaled, his knees shaky, and threw himself back into work, doubling his checks on every chariot. That night, he set traps marking axles with chalk, tying threads across Tool Palesto catch the saboteur. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, his mind racing with calculations, suspicions, and the ever-ticking clock. On day 3, the pace was brutal. The workshop was a whirlwind of sweat and steel, Ben barking orders like a drill sergeant. 50 chariots were done, but exhaustion was taking its toll. Kassar's hands were blistered, Batu's temper flared, and even Temur's translations grew sluggish. Ben kept them going with stories of Montana Tales, of drag races, barbecues, and the open road, his voice, a lifeline in the chaos. But the sabotage continued. A hidden crack in a wheel here, a loosened bolt there. Ben's traps caught nothing, and the saboteur's invisibility gnawed at him like rust on a chassis. That evening, as the camp settled into a restless hush, Sarai appeared again, slipping from the shadows like a dream made flesh. Her midnight blue cloak shimmered in the firelight, her black hair cascading over her shoulders, and her eyes held a dangerous allure that made Ben's pulse quicken. She knelt beside him, her jasmine scent intoxicating, and placed a hand on his arm, her touch warm and electric. "You're close to breaking, Ben Callahan," she murmured, her voice a velvet caress. "But you're stronger than you know. The saboteur is near closer than you think." Ben leaned in, caught in her gaze. "You know something, don't you, Sarai? Spill it. Who's trying to screw me over?" Her lips curved, teasing and secretive. "Trust your instincts, mechanic. Look to those who watch you too closely, and beware Subutaihi smells weakness like a wolf smells blood." Before Ben could press her, she vanished into the night, leaving him with a racing heart and more questions than answers. Her words echoed as he lay on his pallet, staring at the stars. Someone close. Someone watching. He thought of Kassar's eager grin, Batu's quiet strength, Taimur's nervous glances. Could one of them be the traitor? The idea twisted his gut, but he had no time to dwell. Day 4 was coming, and the Khan's deadline loomed like a guillotine. The final day dawned bloody, the sky a bruise of red and purple. Ben was a machine, his hands moving on instinct, his voice hoarse from shouting. The workshop was a furnace, the camp a pressure cooker, as warriors prepared for battle. 90 chariots stood ready, but 10 remained, and every second counted. Ben pushed his team to the brink, his Montana charm replaced by a fierce determination that even Batu respected. Khazar worked like a demon. Timur ran supplies without complaint, and the camp rallied behind Ben, sensing the stakes. Then it happened, the climax Ben had dreaded. As he tightened the final axle on Chariot 99, a shout rang out. A warrior sprinted into the workshop, his face pale, pointing to a chariot at the edge of the lot. Its wheel was shattered, its frame splintered not from wear, but from a deliberate, vicious blow. The camp fell silent, all eyes on Ben. Subutai appeared, his smile a blade, and with him came the Khan himself, his presence a thunderclap. "Who did this?" the Khan demanded, his voice low but deadly. Temur translated, trembling. "Speak, or all will suffer." Ben's mind raced, his traps flashing in his memory. The chalk mark she'd seen once smudged on Taimur's sleeve yesterday, dismissed it as an accident. But now, Timur's nervous eyes, his hesitation, his access to every tool, it clicked. "Timur!" Ben said, stepping forward, his voice steady, despite the fear clawing his chest. "You've been slipping around, messing with my work. Why?" The camp gasped. Timur paled, shaking his head. "No, I am loyal. I." Ben cut him off, holding up a chalk-stained rag he'd found near the wrecked chariot. "This was you. You marked the axles, loosened the bolts. You're the saboteur." Subutai's hand went to his sword, but the Khan raised a hand, his eyes locked on Timur. "Speak, translator, the truth, or your life ends now." Timur crumpled, tears streaming down his face. I was paid by a Khwarezmian spy. They promised gold, safety for my family. I meant no betrayal to you, great Khan, only to slow the outsider." The camp erupted in shouts, warriors drawing blades. Ben's stomach twisted. Timur had been a friend, or so he'd thought. The Khan's gaze shifted to Ben, assessing, then back to Timur. "Take him," he ordered. Guards seized Timur, dragging him away as he sobbed. The Khan turned to Ben. "You have 1 hour to fix this chariot and complete the 100. Do not fail me." Ben nodded, his throat tight. "Yes, sir." The final hour was a blur. Ben, Kassar, and Batu worked as one, their hands flying, their focus absolute. The camp watched, breathless, as they rebuilt the chariot from the ground up. New wheel, new frame, every bolt triple-checked. Sweat stung Ben's eyes, his muscles screamed, but he didn't falter. With seconds to spare, the 100th chariot rolled out, gleaming and perfect, joining its brothers in a line that stretched across the steppe like a steel promise. The Khan inspected the fleet, his face unreadable. Then he climbed aboard the final chariot, signaled a driver, and rode it himself, the wheels humming, the frame steady as a rock. The camp exploded in cheers, warriors pounding their chests, Khazar whooping like a kid at a rodeo. The Khan dismounted and faced Ben, his eyes glinting with something close to respect. "You have done what few could," he said through a new translator, a stern woman named Alton. "Your chariots will carry us to victory. You are no spy, Ben Callahan. You are one of us." Ben exhaled, relief flooding him like a cold beer after a long day. "Thank you, sir. Just doing my job." But as the camp celebrated, Subutai's glare lingered, a reminder that not all battles were won. And in the shadows, Sarai watched, her smile a riddle that promised more danger, more secrets. Ben's triumph was real, but the war was coming, and with it, choices that could break him. The steppe wind roared, carrying the scent of blood and glory, and Ben Callahan, the mechanic from Montana, braced for what came next. The steppe was a cauldron of dust and fury, the horizon ablaze with the clash of armies. Ben Callahan, the grease-stained mechanic from Billings, Montana, stood on a rise overlooking the battlefield, his heart pounding like a V8 engine at full throttle. The Mongol war chariots, 100 sleek, deadly machines he'd rebuilt with sweat, ingenuity, and sheer stubbornness, roared across the plain, their iron-banded wheels chewing through the earth. Genghis Khan's warriors rode them like demons, their curved swords flashing, their war cries splitting the sky. Against them, the Khwarezmian army faltered, their own carts crumbling under the onslaught of Ben's creations. Victory was close, and Ben, for the first time since his inexplicable leap from 21st century Montana to 1200 AD, felt like he belonged in this wild, brutal world. But belonging came with a price. The Khan had named him a general after the chariot's completion, a title that sat heavy on Ben's shoulders. His denim jacket was gone, replaced by Mongol armor leather and bone, snug against his broad chest, its weight a constant reminder of the blood and steel he was now part of. His sandy hair was tied back, his blue eyes sharp with a mix of pride and dread. He'd fixed the Khan's war machine, but the cost was steep. Betrayal by Timur, the translator, Subutai's unrelenting suspicion, and the enigmatic Sarai, whose jasmine-scented presence haunted his dreams. Now, as the battle raged, Ben's fate hung on a knife's edge, and the steppe wind carried whispers of something bigger, something that could send him home or trap him forever. The camp behind him buzzed with tension, warriors preparing for the next wave, women tending the wounded, and children darting through the chaos with wide-eyed awe. Khazar, the wiry kid who'd become Ben's right-hand man, stood at his side, his young face alight with excitement. "Your chariots, Ben! They crush the enemy like wolves on lambs," he shouted, his broken English laced with pride. Ben managed a grin, ruffling Khazar's hair. "Told you, kid, Montana engineering don't mess around, but we ain't done yet." Batu, the hulking smith, joined them, his scarred face grim but respectful. "The Khan fights below," he said through Altan, the new translator, a stern woman whose voice cut like a blade. "He expects you to join him, General Callahan." Ben's stomach twisted. General? He was a gearhead, not a warrior. But the Khan's orders were iron, and Subutai's eyes were always watching, waiting for a misstep. "Right," Ben said, adjusting his armor. "Let's roll." As he descended toward the battlefield, the air grew thick with the stench of blood, sweat, and trampled grass. The chariots were a marvel fast, durable, slicing through enemy lines like a hot knife through butter. But the Khwarezmians weren't done. Their cavalry charged, lances gleaming, and a knot of Mongol chariots faltered, one overturning with a sickening crunch. Ben's heart sank his work. His pride was taking a beating, and the Khan was out there, leading the charge. Then he saw her Sarai, moving through the chaos like a shadow given form. Her midnight blue cloak billowed, revealing a form-fitting tunic that hugged her curves, its embroidery catching the sunlight in a dance of gold and crimson. Her black hair flowed like a river, and her eyes locked onto Ben's with an intensity that made his breath catch. She was no mere camp follower. She was a force. Her presence electric, her smile a promise of secrets too dangerous to touch. She beckoned him toward a tent at the camp's edge, her movements fluid, almost hypnotic. "Ben Callahan," she purred, her voice a velvet blade. "The battle is yours to win, but the future calls. Come with me." Ben hesitated, torn between duty and the pull of her gaze. "Lady, I got a war to fight. The Khan's counting on me. What's this about the future?" Sarai's lips curved, teasing and dangerous. "A way home, mechanic. A path to your Montana. But it comes at a cost." His pulse raced. Home billings, his shop, the Impala waiting for his wrench. But the Khan, Khazar, the chariots, he'd built something here. Something real. And Sarai's eyes held more than promises, they held warnings. Before he could answer, a horn blared, and Alton's voice cut through the din. "General Callahan, the Khan summons you to the front." Ben shot Sarai a look. "Hold that thought, darlin'." He sprinted toward the battlefield, his borrowed sword heavy at his hip, his mind a tangle of hope and dread. The front was a maelstrom, chariots clashing, horses screaming, men falling in sprays of blood. The Khan rode at the center, his armor splattered with gore, his face a mask of relentless will. Subutai was at his side, his lean frame coiled with menace, his eyes flicking to Ben with barely concealed contempt. The Khwarezmians were rallying, their war elephants lumbering forward, their trumpets shaking the earth. Ben's chariots were holding, but barely, and a single failure could tip the scales. "Callahan," the Khan roared, his voice carrying over the chaos. "Your machines falter. Fix this or die with them." Ben's blood ran cold. Fix a battle? He was no tactician, but he knew machines. He scanned the field, spotting the problem. A cluster of chariots bogged down in mud, their wheels spinning uselessly. The elephants were closing in, their massive feet churning the ground. If those chariots fell, the Mongol line would collapse. "On it!" Ben shouted, grabbing Khazar and a handful of warriors. They raced to the stranded chariots, dodging arrows and leaping over fallen bodies. The mud was thick, sucking at Ben's boots, but he dropped to his knees, inspecting the wheels. The axles were clogged, the bearings gummed up with dirt. "Khazar, get me leather strips and fat, now." The boy sprinted off, returning with supplies as Ben worked feverishly, his hands a blur. He packed the axles with fat, wrapped leather around the wheels for grip, and shouted orders to the drivers. "Lighten the load! Ditch the extra gear!" The warriors obeyed, tossing shields and spears aside, and Ben signaled the horses to pull. The chariots groaned, then surged free, their wheels spinning true. The drivers whooped, charging back into the fray, and Ben pumped his fist. adrenaline flooding his veins. But the triumph was short-lived. A shadow loomed an elephant, its trunk raised, its rider aiming a spear straight at Ben. Time slowed, the world narrowing to the glint of steel and the thunder of hooves. Ben dove, rolling through the mud as the spear missed by inches. Khazar screamed his name, and a Mongol warrior tackled the rider, saving Ben's life. He scrambled to his feet, gasping, his heart a jackhammer. The chariots rallied, smashing into the elephant's flank, and the beast trumpeted in panic, retreating with its herd. The tide turned. The Mongol line surged, Ben's chariots leading the charge, their speed and strength breaking the Khwarezmian ranks. The enemy scattered, their banners falling, and the steppe echoed with Mongol victory cries. Ben stood, mud-caked and breathless, as the Khan rode up, his face alight with triumph. "You have done it, Callahan," the Khan said through Alton, his voice a rare mix of respect and warmth. "Your chariots have won us this day. You are no outsider. You are my general, my brother." Ben managed a shaky grin, his chest tight with pride and relief. "Just doing my job, sir. Glad it worked out." Subutai approached, his expression unreadable, but he offered a curt Noda grudging acknowledgement that stung more than any insult. The camp erupted in celebration, warriors chanting Ben's name, Khazar tackling him in a hug, Batu raising a horn of fermented mare's milk in salute. For a moment, Ben let himself bask in it, the steppe's wild energy coursing through him like a shot of whiskey. But the moment shattered when Sarai appeared, her presence a magnet that drew every eye. She stood at the battlefield's edge, her tunic clinging to her like a second skin, her cloak discarded to reveal a form that was both warrior and temptress. Her eyes burned into Ben's, and she beckoned him to a secluded grove, away from the revelry. He followed, unable to resist, his boots crunching on the frost-kissed grass. In the grove, under a sky bruised with twilight, Sarai faced him, her jasmine scent enveloping him like a spell. "You've changed this world, Ben Callahan," she said, her voice low, intimate. "The Khan's empire will grow because of you, but you don't belong here. I am no ordinary woman. I am a weaver of time, a keeper of paths. I can send you home." Ben's breath caught. "Home? You mean Montana? My shop? My life?" She nodded, stepping closer, her fingers brushing his arm, sending a jolt through him. "Yes, but the path is narrow and the price is steep. Stay, and you'll be a legend, but you'll never see your world again. Leave, and you'll lose all you've built here. The Khan, Khazar, this victory. Choose Ben now." His mind reeled. Billings called to him the smell of motor oil, the hum of Skynerd, the open road. But the steppe had claimed a piece of him, its raw power and fierce bonds rooting deep. Khazar's laugh, Batu's respect, the Khan's trust, they were real. And Sarai, her gaze of fire he couldn't escape, was offering a choice that felt like betrayal either way. Before he could answer, a cry pierced the night. Khazar burst into the grove, his face pale. "Ben! Subutaihi speaks against you. He says you'll flee, abandon us. The Khan listens." Ben's blood ran cold. Subutai, always Subutai. Twisting the knife, he looked at Sarai, her eyes unreadable, and made a snap decision. "I'm not running, not yet. I gotta face this." He sprinted back to the camp, Sarai's laughter trailing him like a ghost. The Khan stood by the great tent, Subutai at his side. The camp gathered in a tense circle. Subutai's voice was venom. "This outsider will abandon us, great Khan. He has no loyalty. Let me test him again." Ben stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear clawing his chest. "I ain't going nowhere, General. I built your chariots, I fought your war. I'm here, and I'll prove it any way you want." The Khan's eyes searched Ben's, weighing his soul. Then he spoke, his words a thunderclap. "Enough. Callahan is my general. Subutai, you will ride with him tomorrow to secure the western passes. Together, you will prove your worth or die." The camp fell silent, the weight of the Khan's command absolute. Subutai's jaw tightened, but he bowed. Ben exhaled, his fate sealed for now, but Sarai's offer burned in his mind. Home or glory, safety or legend. And her final words, whispered as she vanished into the night, echoed like a siren's call. "The path awaits, Ben, but time is cruel." As the camp celebrated, Ben stood alone, staring at the stars, the steppe wind carrying the promise of more battles, more choices. Would he stay, forging an empire with the Khan? Or would Sarai's path lead him home, leaving this world behind? The answer lay beyond the horizon, in a story yet untold. Want to know what Ben chooses? Will he conquer the steppe or return to Montana? Stay tuned to my channel for the next chapter of this epic saga, where secrets unravel and destinies collide.